I'll start with some general JoPro stuff.
Okay.
Um, the newest thing is basically this, which is a reading group. And I hope to cover some papers and also maybe a little bit of what I'd like to do and sort of do here. Um, uh, Part of how this came about is Avery. Avery's sort of venturing out into the realm of doing things a bit more, and which is I'm very happy for, and I wanted to support that. But also, there's this overlap with things. Avery's interests are kind of in some game development, some simulation, a lot of the personal um, narrativity and that stuff, and plot twists type things. That's one thing. Um, in plot twisters proper, we've been having some regular meetings and building up some steam, and very much a nod to the classic Bradley line of momentum versus progress, or progress can be more, sometimes momentum and maintaining it is just vital, even though progress may look like this or that along the way. And we've maintained momentum through the summer, and some really interesting things that come out from that. And the sort of the unified piece here, which I'll very briefly mention, is this paper, which is out of MIT, out of the Fluid Interfaces Lab at MIT Media Lab. And this paper has sort of come up in three-ish different spaces now. But I'll get back to that in a moment. This group, and I kind of want to put ethics in here or something after our first. We had a very brief preliminary, a very preliminary meeting. It wasn't brief, but it was me, Avery, and another person named Molly, who kind of went over our ideas about what we want to cover in this group. This isn't really a great outline because it's not updated, but we basically wanted to talk about some papers, some our background motivation. We talked about the RAF paper, which I'll talk about soon, and some different interests, and we'll kind of cover papers in this space. Avery's maybe a bit more interest in game development and like implementing some things. Molly's a bit more I don't want to say ethics focused, but like what do these technologies mean even for like studying elements of like cognition, I don't want to say cognition and consciousness, but how these technologies relate to our internal structure and functioning. So kind of almost a deeper phenomenological plus human computer interface. And she's a background in like some human computer interface things and how machines and trust relate and stuff like that. So this is happening. Like this is kind of getting off the ground, and I inherently see it as sort of a part of like, you know, society ethics technology group, and then I wanted to open it up here and kind of, now that we kind of have a little bit more sense about what's going on, just I want it to be an open thing that if we want to merge it with anything in orthogonal lab, or say, hey, I would like to invite other people to that if they want to do that as sort of a natural. It's basically society ethics technology reading group with a little bit of game dev and a little bit of ethics. Focus on these like the digital the experience of certain digital things. Like it can tie into VR stuff as well. It's not specific to a particular hardware instantiation of it, but all of those things are covered. So I kind of see it as a natural JoPro orthogonal lab, and I even kind of because some of the stuff has come up already in plot twisters. I would ideally like it to be sort of a JoPro orthogonal lab plot twisters combined reading group session thing, particularly led by Avery and myself. And honestly, if I can center Molly too, I feel like Molly's this like actually great counterweight to things that we and some of the philosophy and some of the phenomenology are interested in too. So I kind of would like to have that be sort of the main, if you will, co-hosts of the discussion, and go from there. But we'll see. It's not. I'm not entirely. We're just getting it started, but I wanted to do it more ahead, and particularly for orthogonal too. Like I've been to mention like, hey, like Avery is just getting, kind of coming out of a period of not doing a lot, but they are interested in some of the they're experimenting with some of their own game development stuff and their own theories and implementing into those spaces. So I'm like, hey, like we have some experience with some of the simulation work here, so like let's try to overlap that as much as possible. So that's one thing that's happening. Um, I'll go into some of the specifics here about this. Um, it 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 sort of came about. Avery said this is some quote that I captured. I'm passionate about ways that digital narratives can be used to enable flourishing. Allah reminds me of the advancing humans with AI, Pat Patton and Patty Mays at MIT phrase flourishing, but I don't think they knew that at the time. As part of this, I'm interested in exploring both the socio-cultural considerations behind technology with crafted, as well as the creation of insightful models of aging and the effective implementation towards technology that end. Like, okay, nice. Also, like, I don't know if Jen will be a part of the meetings proper all the time, but I've kind of made a social work kind of spotlight because Jen's a social work student, and I wanted to bring her into this because one of the things that's coming up all the time, and this can be a conversation for a different time, but it's like in the training of someone learning to be a clinical social worker or whatever, it's a very interesting use case of someone who is thrust upon both people dealing with these AI relationships and in the training of someone in the graduate program. It's an interesting situation where as a master's student, you're kind of prohibited from using AI to make your stuff. But there's also an instance of uh, grading through AI is you're told the TAs are using AI to grade your papers and give you feedback, and you in a mandatory course, which you cannot get out of, and you cannot opt out of the pilot program. You are exposed to a pilot program for a GTP-like agent that's used for your training as a developing professional, with a particular early stages model of GTP-based agents that you're supposed to interact with and learn from how to do your vocation on other people, on other human beings. So it's just, so it's sort of like you're on the business end of the AI, but you're not given any knowledge about it. And that's something that we talked about that today, and that's an ongoing conversation. But I feel like it's a fun mix here because we have Avery, who's very interested in this, theory and art and game development and meaning, and Molly, who has this background in like doing technology and being part of like government implementations and different people dealing with the impact of technology. And you have Jen who's doing like the social work, both like and is a current master's student who's learning to deal with people that are having to deal with technology and using it herself. Like this is a really interesting mix in that space. And I kind of wanted to keep different elements of that in the group over time. And obviously, you all know my interests and my eccentricities. So just a few things to mention out of this. The first thing we're going to cover is oh, I just messed it up here. This paper. And it's also a slight note. Ironically, before I get on this paper, this came up. One person from Plot Twist is at the Oxford Internet Institute still, and this is a separate reading group. This is the Games and Technologies Interest Group, which has kind of been on hiatus for a little bit. But like totally unrelated to me making this other group. Like, oh, hey, by the way, I might be starting this up again in the next year. So in the next few months, this might come out, which is very much even more exploring games industry, XR, VR, all those things. And we might have sort of an invite to attend some of that. A lot of cool people. Amanda Curtis is with Plot and many other cool people here. But that may be sort of another related thing that hopefully we interact with someone, maybe cross pollinate with a little bit. I mentioned this very briefly. I'll mention this was actually a really interesting discussion between Brene Brown, who's kind of almost pops like, but not really. Like she actually is, I've kind of been not followed her at all for a while, and this is actually a really 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 interesting discussion between Brene Brown and Kate Crawford, who like Atlas of AI and all this other stuff. Also like her amazing website. It's not the right thing. Calculating Empires. For map lovers, this is just a cool thing, like across eras, timeline, and these sort of like different communications and education and stuff. Very like frontier map, like all the cool stuff. It's a nice effort. It's imperfect, but it's a nice like collection for the last 500 years or so. So shout out to Kate Crawford for that. But this discussion was actually quite interesting and quite relevant, and more about that some other time. Um, this paper came up a little bit in the discussion group and with Jen about like divorces and this sort of like these advanced things about like AI relationships, both chatbots and all that other stuff, but then how they're affecting real people and these pressures on all this stuff. More about this some of the time. But the center point for right now, and what I'll conclude on is this paper, which is, I think it might be easy to do this too, just for some, like, where does this paper come from? This paper comes from, it's not showing up here. Well, yeah, you guys probably know enough anyway. But I showed this paper to someone like, oh yeah, this is really nice. Like it's a nice paper because it has some grounding and different stuff. And I'm like, yeah, well, Rosalind Picard is sort of the captain of effective computing in that way, and Patty Mays has been a long time person at Fluid Interfaces at MIT Media Lab, and Minsol Kim like is doing a lot of really cool stuff. Minsol also had a paper at NeurIPS about like interpreting EEG data in a certain way, which is pretty cool. But this paper is very much this. What's cool about it? I'm just going to jump into it. Reflective agency for empirical framework for AI-mediated self-reflection systems, and I'm not going to go through it. I mean, jump in and just get to some of the parts where it's in here or like related stuff. And they do try to ground it in philosophy in a nice way. Mediated selfhood, phenomenology. They situate phenomenology here with Heidegger's stuff and Indies, I think. Yeah, Edith. And they go this, they get a little bit of, Aristotle, virtue, ethics, eudaimonia stuff. They get these principles of sort of what's going on. And they try to develop this framework that's around the principles and then also these tensions. Like they try to mitigate these tensions about, or not to try to address or identify these tensions about like between user autonomy and systemic guidance, and try to build that out, like what is someone's experience doing and how it impacts on things like phenomenology and overall the sense of how someone's narrative is being developed. The kind of the rough one or two sentence version of the paper is, and they do a number of these case studies on like common two-part empirical case study. First, systemic analysis of 6 widely used AI journaling applications, and then an exploration of perception responses to these tensions and principles. So they're using things like Replica, I think Waze, and some other like popular things that are these AI journals or mediators, or they like this advanced basically these chatbots that are purposed for different programs, and they're looking at how does this affect how someone's drawing a conclusion or how someone is reflecting, and they look at the different pressures on all this, on the journaling process, and the why this paper is sort of interesting, and I originally presented it to some folks in plot twisters, is that in essence, this paper I think justifies everything plot twisters has been doing from the start, which is to say most AI right now pushes people towards towards conclusions, or as Brene Brown said very nicely in this talk, the seduction of it is a certainty. It's a certainty making machine. Like, you're going to get certainty, even if it's hogwash, even if it's a hallucination or citation, making up references to justify itself. You're presented with this veneer, this appearance of certainty, in its language in general. And we're saying even in the journaling component, or this supposedly interactive component where you're finding something supposed to relate to you or whatever, the pressure is on this sort of arbitrary reduction of nuance or reduction of um, all these other things, and putting it into, well, here's something that's going to kind of undermine the agency of your reflection process, of your self narrative, of your comprehension of the situation. And it's kind of a call for, we envision AI not as a guide, but as a quiet companion helping individuals stay connected with their evolving sense of self and remain the primary agents in their discovery, thereby preserving what we define as their reflective agency. We urge designers and researchers to adopt and extend our framework to ensure future technologies genuinely support autonomy, meaningful self-discovery, and a digital well-being, which is like, that's basically what plot twisters has been founded on. So it's a sort of interesting paper for plot twisters that justifies, with some research and some analysis, what plot twisters is doing there. And that's cool for plot twisters, but it's also interesting in the diginest sense for like game design, and in some of our other senses for, teasing apart some of their take on phenomenology, some of their take on this human computer interaction part of things, and so on. So I will pause there for any questions. We're going to go over the paper. I think is be our first major paper in the Diginest reading group, although it's kind of already come up in some other places before, but we might kind of center some discussion about that for the group next week. We actually met Friday night, which probably isn't a popular time for most people, but Avery and Molly and myself were like, okay, well, this is an okay time to do it. So we might meet at Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time again next week, which probably most people won't go, but we are making them async, recording them, and eventually get them out. But that's sort of where we're going to go with that, and a lot of other things ahead. So I'll pause for any comments or questions for now.